Transgender.
Oh my goodness, where to begin?
Transgender.
When I think of transgender, first and foremost, I think of it as an umbrella that covers a multitude and plethora of different identities. And some of those identities being a trans man and a trans woman, which is what we're mostly used to. But that also includes the non-binary identity. It includes two-spirited people. It includes everyone on that trans spectrum. So when I think of what transgender is, I think of it as a spectrum of identities that may not coincide with the identity that you were assigned with at birth.
So for example, I was assigned male at birth, but my gender is female. So that makes me transgender.
In its most simplest terms, a transgender individual is somebody who is moving through gender. What do I mean by that? So we all have an assigned sex at birth, typically male or female. So a transgender person is an individual who was assigned a particular sex at birth. Let's say in my instance, I was assigned male at birth and I transitioned to female. So a transgender person is a person who moves through gender.
I'm happy to believe that most of the public is fully accepting of the term and the notion and the actual reality of transgenders. Unfortunately, there's that small group of very misguided, very misinformed individuals out there who want to make a living, if you will, out of being opposed to transgenders, and that's unfortunate.
Especially right now in the U.S. with what's going on with legislation, the stigma is we don't have humanity. We are not often seen as humans. We're not seen as folks and beings who are deserving of dignity.
So one of the misconceptions that people have of people of trans experience is that we're not authentic. We're delusional. We need mental health, support. And on some levels we do, but it's not because we're not being authentic. It's through the trauma that we experience.
I think the biggest one is that trans folks they hate the body that they're in, right? Or they think that they were born into the wrong body or anything like that. And I think that's a huge misconception. I also think another one is that after transitioning, a lot of people think that we regret transitioning. And the reality of that is there are more people who regret a tattoo than people who regret transitioning. We're talking about less than 1% of folks who have any sort of regret related to any sort of transitioning or gender-affirming care or health care that's provided. The other big misconception is what gender-affirming care actually does look like for youth and for children. I think that the far right and a lot of other folks have this misconception and this propaganda that goes in to thinking that children are having gender-affirming surgery or things like that, and that's just not the case.
I think the most pervasive stigma is that trans people are incredibly different than the majority of society. And the fact is, with the exception of the gender incongruency, I think that we're all terribly mundane for the most part. I mean, the most pervasive thought in my head when I was on my way here was like, yeah, I think the Shy is on. I think it is. I think it's on today, right? Oh yeah, and I want to get to my lentil soup. But again, I say all that to say, I do believe that there's a lot of mysticism around who and what trans-identified folks are. And with the exception of the day-to-day traumas that exist from a world that doesn't inherently understand why trans people are the way they are, who trans people are. To be honest with you, I'm struggling at an answer, which actually just shows there really isn't a great deal of difference between you and me.
People are looking at it through the limited education. And so depending on the level of education, you're gonna be able to see someone's true authenticity. So when someone thinks transgender, depending on the information they receive, they're gonna either look at it through the lens of the media, which sometimes isn't great. You might think of someone of transgender experience because you've been educated as someone who's very brave just for existing in this political climate. So the definition or how people see a person of trans experience really varies from person to person.
That they're trying to convert other people, that they are denying their birth gender assignment intentionally, and that they would seek to do harm to others. And all those things are just lies and just bad notions all the way around.
Like puberty blockers to just slow down the impact that these hormones are gonna have on your body potentially forever. Like that's already happening when young people are going through puberty. There are hormones doing things to their bodies that are changing the way they look, changing their shape, etc. And a lot of gender affirming care is just like pausing that process so that young people can socially have time to participate in society and participate in their families and, you know, in their social settings as the gender that is authentic to them. I think that it's almost like I think that a lot of the transition and services for young people are about like giving young people space and time to be able to be the person that they are instead of letting a potentially irreversible process, biological process happen to them that is out of alignment with who they are. And young people are significantly much more happy. They perform better in school. Their mental health, their suicide, their substance use, all that stuff like dramatically decreases when they're in a supportive environment of their gender identity. And so that is preparing much healthier adults that are ready to go on and be successful, however we define like success as an adult, get a good job someday, I don't know, like run for mayor or whatever, like, but create a more balanced and well people by affirming who they are when they're adolescents instead of forcing them to be and look a certain way.
To reach a point where I'm willing to look at my gender at birth and say that's not who I am, because I feel it. I feel it in my soul. I feel it in my body. And so I choose to live the way I feel is a huge leap. It's a huge leap. It really is. I think that probably you're healthier mentally than a lot of us because of that. Yeah. Now, if they need some help, behavioral health, it's not because of them living their truth. It's because of people persecuting them. It's because of the rejection from their loved ones. It's because of all those kinds. It's because of their denial of opportunity.
I think the core of it is people hate what they don't understand. And people hate what they cannot compartmentalize. And I love that you asked me to expand on that, because the reason I'm very intentional with words, I try not to use words like transphobia or homophobia because no one's scared of anything, right? I use words like anti-trans, anti-queer, anti-gay, anti-lesbian, anti-black, right? No one says you have black phobia. Like, no, you're just racist. So I don't even think that it is a fear. It is a hate. It is a deep-seated hate that is grounded in white supremacy and grounded in a lot of religion and grounded in the patriarchy.
I think that that's the phobia. I think that we are a classist society that finds a certain pleasure or affirmation in having something that you don't have. But what does it mean for me when you have what I have? Because I like the fact that you don't have access to what I have access to, because the book has told me I'm doing everything right and you're doing everything wrong. So should you not have what I have? And I think that that's what this is about. I truly do.
It is this fear that the people who have been most privileged in this world and in this country are becoming outnumbered. They're becoming called out, and their privilege is at stake. So it really comes down to folks being scared. They're not scared of the individual. They just hate us. They're scared of that losing of privilege.
People objectify us all the time. I could be dressed in a suit, very professional, and I'll still have someone disrespect me, and I was on the phone with my partner when he lived in Florida, and we're talking, and a person came up to me and said, "Hey, I've got $20. And I said, "Did you just hear that?" So it doesn't matter how we're dressed, just the fact that we're people of trans experience. People think that that's everything that's on our mind, that's all we want to do. So it's very real.
I look forward to a day when identity is terribly mundane. I really do. I still find it rather comical in a broad way, I guess, in this like grand comedy type of thing, that like, God, that's still a thing. Like, we're still so fixated on that. I look forward to the day when someone says I'm transgender, someone goes, okay.
And a lot of these anti-trans bills, if you look at them, they usually have the word child in them. The Put Children First bill, the Protect Our Children's Rights bill, right? And we're seeing it with what they're teaching us in schools. It's not just about being anti-trans, it's about being anti-black. And when you are black and trans, you don't know why someone's hating you. It could be for both, but it can also be, hey, we don't want folks to say the word slavery in schools anymore. And so we're seeing this sort of uprising of it being okay to publicly and intentionally hate people.
There are people out here looking for an excuse to do harm. That's the reality. People who are looking for an excuse to do harm. They're part of that small ilk of ignorant, misled folks, who drank the religious right Kool-Aid, drank the right-wing political Kool-Aid. Those are the folks who will do harm. Those are the folks who will perpetrate an environment of harm. And as transgender people, every day, no matter where you are, no matter where you walk, no matter where you live, no matter where you work, if you've got a job, no matter where, there's going to be somebody who is going to try to do you harm. It may be verbal harm, it may be emotional harm, it may be physical harm. The deaths among transgenders of color is just off the charts. It really is. And again, it's largely because of the inability to get over the barriers and the hurdles that are placed, first because you're a person of color, secondly because you're transgender, and third because you're living in an environment of hate. And so that hate is being perpetrated, and you never know where it's coming from. You never know when to expect it. You can be walking down the street. You could be sitting in a movie theater. You could be sitting in a restaurant. You could be on your job.
This is something I've heard a lot about being Black, a lot about being queer. I think when we have identities that are like stigmatized by the mainstream, there is a fear because there's a very real experience of being hurt by the people who loved you first, like your parents noticing that you identify differently or that you behave or look differently than what they were taught was appropriate or what is normal or what most people are like. And so you get that experience of like suppression and potentially like punishment or policing from like your first folks, like your kin, the people in your home. So I think that those experiences of kind of being kind of punished or even encountering the fear that our loved ones have, like they're worried that we'll be hurt for being different. Lots of Black queer people are loved totally by their parents. But I think that there's a fear of being hurt by other people because they want to shame you or they want to, make the rules that you're breaking about society like disappear. They don't want to have that conversation. And so it's easier to punish or hurt you. And I think that, so there's a real fear that we have as Black queer people or Black trans people experience because of that. But I don't think that, I think that there's also a lot that's really beautiful, really amazing, really exciting, and a great sense of pride for being a queer.
For the trans Latinas, my generation, I am 55 years old, usually live in those Latino neighborhoods. In our culture, to be trans or part of the LGBTQ community is not accepted still. So the struggle, it is very hard. Many of the trans Latinas that I have met, they left Mexico because of violence in their own families. So they have to migrate. Unfortunately, when they cross the border, many of them were abused again. So there was violence in Mexico, there was violence in the border. When they arrive into Chicago, they arrive into these violent neighborhoods, such as La Villita, Little Village, Pilsen, and other neighborhoods. So to go out in the street during the day, it is difficult. because of that stigma, the culture, religion. So even what I have experienced, I feel very comfortable. I live in Pilsen. It is my comfort zone. But if I move to a little village, it's so different because I see people looking at me. If I go into Target, to any store downtown, people have followed me. Even though I have the power of purchase. So just what they see, that's an stigma. They don't know who am I, what I do.
And if someone calls you out, there could be someone in the crowd that says, oh, a transgender, well, I have an obligation to take that individual down. So they live with this fear every day, every single day. And, you know, and you've even got situations where law enforcement is not inclined to be as protective and as supportive as they should be.
I think oftentimes we center and highlight folks in the LGB community. We center and highlight trans folks in the LGB community kind of as decoration, as optics, good optics, right? When we want our inclusion to look authentic, we find a trans person to lift up and highlight.
That's painful for many of us, to have to conform, even when we're cisgender. And there's pain and healing needs to happen there. And I think sometimes that's where the transphobia is coming from. That I had to go through this, I had to deal with it. You don't get to break the rules. That's not right. It's not fair. You're trying to have it both ways. You're trying, you know, I think there's a pain. It comes up in my work, working with lesbians and bisexual cis women a lot. There's a lot of pain that cis women have from sexism. And part of the way that we want to protect ourselves sometimes is by excluding trans women. Say, this is our safe space, this is our bit. If I ain't got power nowhere else, I got power to say you can't come in here. And what we should do is like, what needs to heal? What's the fear that you have? And let's actually talk about how we can make a safer space.
I do know that LGB folks absolutely are there in the forefront, but I do wish that quantity of individuals was larger.
I think back to Stonewall, the Stonewall riots in New York, which some people in our own community to this very day don't want to accept the truth that it was drag queens, it was transgenders who stood up against the police oppression when they raided that Stonewall Tavern in New York City. That's who it was. That's who stood up. And if you fast forward to this very day, so much of the work that's being done on the front lines is still being done by transgenders. And we've got to accept that as the truth. And anybody who's hesitant about accepting and being inclusive of transgenders as a part of the LGBTQ plus community, you know, really need to rethink their position and their attitude.
I saw in real time people realize that trans folks and Black queer folks have always been at the forefront of civil rights movements, of every single civil rights movement. And when I saw that kind of aha moment with folks like, oh wait, hold up, like I mentioned earlier about collective liberation, and you saw people be like, well, hold up, the trans man is speaking on behalf of Black men. This trans man is speaking on behalf of Black women. This trans man is speaking on behalf of Latinx people. And I could see certain people open up their eyes. I can see certain people be like, well, wait a minute. Well, what they were telling us about trans people, maybe this is different because they're out here marching for us, fighting for us, and they don't have to be.
respectability is a huge part of how anybody is moving through this space. Like, I think that's white people too, you know, I mean, by being like cis white people, they're already at the center of what's considered respectable. And all the rest of us are constantly trying to prove ourselves as being respectable or valuable enough to keep our jobs, to be considered intelligent enough to employ, to be considered that what we're offering is of high enough value to compensate us for. So like, if we're just looking socially at what having a job is and what negotiating a salary is, a lot of that is just what people are perceiving about you. And so if people are already perceiving that you are not mainstream enough, or they're like, oh great, we got a trans person on the team. Go talk about the trans issues. Go be front and center. Be at the meetings and people keep mentioning that how good people they are because they've hired you onto their team. Like, you're constantly dealing with microaggressions and transphobia too. So I think that all those things are huge barriers to people being able to meet their basic needs. I think, again, we all struggling with that stuff. And then when you add on top of it that it is normal and acceptable for people to actually exclude you, to treat you poorly. Politicians get on TV every day and talk about how you are less than human and don't deserve basic rights. Then how is it that you're supposed to be safe going into a job?
You're speaking to a very accurate, stark reality that the average trans person, more narrowly trans woman, even more narrowly black trans woman, is subject to make $10,000 or less for their entire lives. And you, the viewer, can't imagine what you would do with $10,000 a year. Inflation is real. You know, those of us who are gainfully employed are oftentimes wondering what we're going to do. You know, let alone $10,000 a year? Really? We know that discrimination is illegal. And again, Illinois is this magical little island where we have some real tight anti-discrimination laws when it comes to gender identity. However, when you are applying for a job at Target, laws, legislation, regulations, policies, those are not things that are being honored or even being put at the forefront. There are a myriad of reasons and excuses why trans people don't get the job, right? But we know in reality the reason why is because of that individual's identity. It's a reality. It is a reality. And the repercussion of that is folks don't stop having to survive. So ultimately, desexualization, people turn to that industry where there are individuals who will pay money to exploit.
Well, we are in Chicago, which is the deadliest place for black trans people in the world. There are more deaths, murders of black trans people in Chicago than anywhere else. So, I mean, it is a fear of waking up every morning and walking out of my door. There is a fear, especially as someone who is very public and vocal about trans issues and gay rights and queer rights, whether it's on Instagram or just, IRL. There's always that fear that when I go to a university to speak or to a company to talk or anything like that, that someone will be waiting for me who opposes my beliefs. But not only that, but just opposes my existence. Because we're not even talking about political beliefs, right? We're talking about there are people out there who do not agree with, as if it's something to agree with, my existence. No matter who I am, whether I am a trans politician or a trans public figure, it doesn't matter. They do not agree with my existence. There are people out there that will claim that they love me, which is also a fear of just being a trans person at all. Most trans people, and especially black trans women, are killed in their homes. So what that tells me is that they're killed by people who they initially trusted. They're killed by folks who say that they love them, that by folks who claim to care about them. So when you are trying to form intimate relationships, whether that's a friendship or a lover or a partner or anything like that, there's that fear that, well, you know, if someone finds out that I'm trans, are you going to be embarrassed? Are you going to be hurt? And are those feelings going to drive you to take my life? Are those feelings going to drive you to kill me?
So the moment I step out, I don't make eye contact with too many people, just because there's so much trauma with people giving you an awful gaze, or people thinking that a gaze or looking at someone is an invitation for someone to come up to you and want to harass you, right? And I don't know who these people are. My safety is always at risk because it doesn't matter the neighborhood I walk into. It could be the wealthiest. I'll still get an awful gaze or gossip. And I don't know where that leads to, right?
I don't know who saw me on the news earlier. I don't know who read an article and they're just like, hey, you're that person. Believe it or not, it actually happened the other day. I don't know how someone may react when they say, yeah, you know, I just saw you on the news and my kid was sitting next to me and I didn't like that. Those are real things.
And I think that sometimes people just leave trans women out to deal with it on their own without any kind of support or acknowledgement. I think that's happening most of the time. I think that's actually happening at a massive scale politically in our country, of just abandoning trans women to deal with the harms of sexual violence, sexism, and gender-based violence without the support that cis women are getting. And cis women themselves are already under-supported.
And the work that we do at Brave Space Alliance and the many of protests and actions that we've been at, the many of stances that we've taken against anti-trans legislation and anti-queer legislation, it is fearful to do my job. It's fearful to show up to my job every day. And death threats are something that we get, especially during 2020 and 2021. We got about 3 or 4 death threats a week. And these weren't just general. A lot of them were very targeted towards me, towards our leadership staff. So it's a fear of even going to work every day because you don't know what some crazy person is going to do.
Before transitioning, I would go out into the world and nod at everyone because that's just having manners. Since transitioning and living my life authentically as a woman, things shifted. I can't do that anymore. People discriminate. I know a friend of mine who thought about detransitioning because she could not get a job anywhere. She said, Alla, I think I'm just gonna detransition. I don't know how I'm gonna make a living. People don't wanna hire me. People give me interviews, and I just graduated college. I worked so hard so I can finally just make a living, and the doors are still closing on me. It's gonna take employers to be educated on how to create space for people of color, of trans experience, and be competent. So it's not only the individual trans experience, but it's also the employer.
Folks don't want to hire trans people. And not only do folks not want to hire trans people just because we're trans, other people are okay co-signing that hate and discrimination. The conditions that trans people are forced to be in to survive may sometimes interfere with respectability politics and what we see as professionalism.
There's so much more to the issue of finding work. Again, you know, if you start from the basis that you're African American in particular, you know, if employment in this country becomes the cold of the nation, then for African Americans it's pneumonia. If you're transgender, you've got one more hurdle to overcome in order to get employment. Somebody told me the other day about a transgender woman in a Dollar Tree as a clerk, and She was the only one on duty, and there was a line, long line, and there was an old woman at the front up front, waiting to cash out, and things weren't moving as quickly as they possibly could, and she started yelling and verbally abusing the clerk, who was transgender, and yelling to everybody in the store, "That's a man, that's not a woman, that's a man." And people turned on this woman, turned on this old lady, and challenged her and corrected her in the store. When I heard this, it brought tears to my eyes that people in the Black community in particular are coming into reality about what it means, But this transgender, I want to go to that store. I want to meet her. I want to find out, what it is that brought her to this particular job, and find out if there are other aspirations that she may have that may take her to something other than the job that she has. And then maybe introduce her to Brave Space Alliance or Life is Work, where they may move her along into, a better opportunity, a better job opportunity than the one she has now. But those are hurdles that we have to overcome. As Black people, we've been overcoming hurdles, since we were brought here involuntarily. We're still overcoming hurdles to this day. They talk about the unemployment rate in this country. They have to give you two figures. They have to give you a general unemployment rate, and then they have to give you an unemployment rate for African Americans. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. But if there are places, if there are opportunities where transgenders in particular, African American transgenders in particular, can begin to learn some new skills that would move them up the ladders of opportunity, and then begin to move into better job opportunities.
When people show up to a job interview or to submit a housing application, when they get on the phone and are talking to an employer or a provider, I think that there's a way that they would have to sometimes immediately have to advocate for themselves and their identity if a person is misreading them and misunderstanding them because of the way that they look. And I think there's a culture of accusing people of deception. Like if I didn't notice that you were transgender and you didn't tell me you were transgender, that you have deceived them, and then they use that as a reason to be able to cause harm. When I think that, so I think that that's one of the ways that people experience discrimination, is that if you don't let people know your medical history or if they make an assumption about what kind of genitals you have, or the way you may have identified earlier in your life, or the way people have maybe misunderstood you in the past, that you're causing them, that you're some kind of harm or some violation. I was on the phone here, someone called me the other day, and they wanted some support because they worked at a restaurant, and they're a server, and their manager somehow found out that they were trans. And then the manager was confronting them around, you lied to me. Your application is a lie, and so you're fired. She's able to come back and let this person know that that's illegal. But then she experienced less shifts, having to work in the back more, so she's not making tips directly from the work that she's doing with people. And so I think that's also a part of the ways that people experience harm in the workplace. Even if their job can't fire them, the way they'll be treated, they're experiencing some kind of retaliation.
And that puts them in harm's way in so many ways, right? Sexual violence, physical violence. We know that STI, STD, HIV transmission rates are still high and prevalent amongst the LGBTQ community, particularly trans community. But when you are essentially prodded into the sex work industry for survival reasons, what other options do you have? So when I think about why it is so important that trans people have access to fair employment. Look, let's take morality out of this. I want you, the viewer, to think of this from an economic standpoint. Okay, trans people being employed relieves the burden of you having to, in some word, as way people put it, take care of folks, right? People being employed is good for the state. It is good for industry. It is good for the economy. It's good for a lot of things. You would want folks to be employed. I'm just not partial to who is bagging my items. I don't care. But let's not just stop at, okay, fine, yeah, you're right. Trans people should be able to work in a grocery store. No, they should be able to work in whatever industry that they choose. They should be able to be doctors, attorneys, teachers, and mind you, which they are, because you're looking at a CEO. So again, I want you to recognize that when we are employed, when we are living sustainable, thriving lives, it's good for everybody.
So transitioning really was the start of me of really being happy. I've always had moments of happiness, but it's been more consistent since I've medically transitioned. I started volunteering. I started taking risks. I built more confidence. I found a partner. I am excelling in work. I am centering my mental health and other things that I wasn't able to do before. So transitioning really was a vehicle for me to just live a real life.
My mother said she knew before I stated it. She did. She recalls noticing a gender incongruency. She said when I was about 4 or 5, and she just kind of brushed it off. I had parents who didn't support or deny. They just kind of, I don't think that they were aware that they were evidence-based before evidence-based was a thing. I think they just kind of said, you know what? Let's just see how this plays out. They didn't throw me footballs and they didn't throw me dolls. It was just kind of a, okay.
So I am a later in life transitioner, especially with like Gen Z. Folks are transitioning at 18, or the average age is somewhere around like 23, 24 years old. And I didn't start transitioning until, I didn't start medically transitioning until 31 years old. So only about a year and a half ago, if you want to do that math. So I think one of the biggest things was realizing how interconnected everyone's liberation is, right? Despite how you identify, despite your racial background and ethnic background, transitioning really allowed me to figure out that unless trans people are free, and unless specifically Black trans women have dignity and are free and are able to thrive in this country and in this world, none of us are free.
Well, culture, we're writers, creating platforms for other voices, marginalized voices. So I am an honest person. And I would say after 3 months, I say no. I'm not honest. I have not been honest with myself. I am a fucking faggot. I am puto. I am a homosexual. And I've been hiding that all my life because I knew it. And then that's when I decided to transition, to accept myself. I said, if I'm gonna die, I wanna be myself. And for the first time, I feel liberated. And I start writing to my friends, close friends, talking to many of them about my story. However, I was still ashamed of myself.
I would do little things to transition, whether it be pierce one ear, whether it was to let my hair grow out, whether it was to get some bell bottoms and say, I'm into 70s, but really it was just me living more of my authentic self. Putting on a little bit of eyeliner, and I would say, it's very rock and roll, but really it was just me being more of myself. So I've been transitioning, I would say, since the age of 14. But medically, it's been about 8 years. My mother is amazing. She was there when I had my affirming surgeries. So even though she's gives me a hard time, and doesn't really say I love you, but she's there at the doctor. Well, she does say I love you from time to time, but it's very rare. She says, I won't say it, but you're gonna see it. So she's amazing. My father is wonderful. He calls me mija, which is daughter in Spanish. He met my partner and said, I just want my daughter to be happy. That's really what I want. So there's been a lot of evolution, but there's still little work that needs to be done.
So as I began to develop and grow, it was just something that never left. And I'm really thankful that my parents just weren't weird about it. Was it their desire? No. But what they knew is that they had a child who deserved to be healthy and whole. And in the words of my mother, I was her assignment. And she couldn't forfeit that assignment based off of being thrown a bit of a curveball. So they ran in and supported me. And without that support, I would not be sitting here as the person I am today.
The reaction of my cousin when I transitioned and I wrote a letter, he told me he was cracking up, laughing aloud. And he said, I thought we have been hanging out for almost 30 years, and I thought that I knew you. And I don't. I feel ridiculous. But at the same time, he said, I'm here to support you in anything that you need. So most of my family that were involved in writing, workshops, publishing, they accepted me. My dad, still he doesn't understand. What am I? And two sisters have been very supportive. They were the first one to call me in feminine pronouns. Two brothers, they don't accept my decision, which I don't care. I carry a male name that was assigned by my mother for a particular reason. And I like being called Francisco, Pancho. But I realized that that wasn't me, that belonged to someone else. I didn't decide to be born. I didn't decide my name. I didn't decide my gender identity, my sexual preference. However, I decided my name. I choose the name Maya so I can construct this character that you are looking right now through the lens.
I always say that my mother is grace wrapped in dignity. And I would not be where I'm at without her. My parents were simple people, hardworking people. And one of the most amazing things that my mother said to me was, I named you because you had the voice to name yourself. But now that you have your own voice, it is for you to tell the world what your name is.
If I tell you my story, I don't look like my story. The first one that passed, which is the second oldest, Jonathan Johnson, unfortunately lost him to gun violence. due to one of his old classmates. And then my firstborn, which is Jeffrey Jaleesa Holmes, he passed due to a drug overdose, fentanyl. He was a trans. Me and my firstborn, we did everything together. Actually, he came out gay at 12. Then he realized, this is me. So he was dressed in female clothes. Me, coming from the family that I come from, I called his auntie on the biological father's side, my mother, because we come from a generation, the ground, when we can't deal with things or don't understand things, we have a group meeting. So that's what we did on a Sunday after church. And that's when he informed us that he's a woman. He felt that he's a woman, that's him. And he put on, his clothes. I always say his costume, because that was our way of communicating and understanding. Once we got through all this, confidence went out the roof. You couldn't tell him nothing. Didn't want to take out my garbage because he had on a Kardashian sweater. Boy, you better get your butt in there, And then it still was the respect that he know I had a boy. So that was still my son. Now that I'm thinking about it, and he just going through my head, and I'm just seeing that face, like him saying, "Mama, I'm like you. I'm like you. I'm like my mama. I'm like my mama." Sums it up: heart, free spirit. He was just an overall nice person. He'll give you his bare last. He would give you his shoes and walk barefooted, which he loved to do. He loved, you would think he was raised down south somewhere, but but he was just a very, very generous and free spirit. Jeff, when he lost his brother, started going crazy and drugs, wasn't able to deal. One thing he told me before he passed, "I never want to see you frown. Never want to see you cry. You did everything for us. We never wanted for nothing." I have so many letters from my kids, because when I talk about talk, when we angry, sometimes you can't talk. I have so many letters from them. They write down, because I tell them your voice is everything. Be vocal, be communicative, say what's in your heart, because you never know when you're going to be gone. You never know when you're going to be. And for me to know that when my kids was already here, for them to be able to write me letters, can nobody not tell me that my kids didn't love me and I didn't love them? I would say to the parents, stay connected with these kids. Let these kids know their values. You don't have to be around negativity. You don't have to be around judgment. You don't have to be around people that don't love you for you. You have choices. You a king, you a queen, nothing less. Don't let nobody take that from you. Know your identity. Because sometimes what you see physically is not what you are inside.
I always encourage folks to find your community, find community. It can be hard. It can be absolutely hard, but use the resources that are in front of you to find folks. And maybe that might look like virtual, for those of us who are fortunate to find in-person community, fantastic. But sometimes we have to find that community the best way that we know how.
You have a trans person in your life. I promise you. You either have a trans person in your life, you have had a trans person in your life, you have been in close proximity to a trans person, and I want folks to sit with that. And if you did not know this person is trans, I want you to internally ask yourself why. And it's always going to come down to safety. Are you a safe person for someone like me to come out to? Are you a safe person for someone to confide in, whether it's at work, whether it's a friend, whatever it may be?
talking to other cis people about trans issues and calling them in, being gentle with your people, but making sure they're on their P's and Q's when your friends are over. I think that's important. Taking the responsibility to be like, I need to change myself, and then I need to change people who trust me. That's the number one thing that cis people could do. And then express their discontent with public officials who are pushing transphobic legislation.
I would love for people to walk away knowing that we are worthy of respect. We have a mother and a father and siblings. We have partners. We have so many things in common. We need help. We need support. We have so many gifts. We contribute a lot to this world. We are game changers. We are leading a lot of the movement, right? That a lot of people are benefiting from. So I think it's important that people acknowledge that and center us.
I really don't see how my existence or the existence of other individuals like myself affects you so deeply. My access to employment, to housing, to marriage, to a bathroom, don't stop you from yours. I promise you it does not. And I think that deep down, not even deep down, I think you know that too. I believe homophobia, transphobia in its truest sense is not you being inherently afraid of the physical existence of a trans person or a gay person or beyond. I think it's your deep fear of what will the world look like when an individual such as yourself is on equal footing with me.
I can walk down the street and people won't necessarily know that I'm a gay man. Transgenders can't do that. They can't do it. And they dare to live another layer of truth. They're living their truth. And people need to accept that. And a disappearance, of all those folks who are out there with their negative comments, with their negative attitudes, with their lies about who transgender people are, that has got to go.